Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name's Ryan Griffis, as I was introduced earlier. I'm going to just tell a really sort of brief story. It's a story that hopefully does not seem overly self-contained and complete, as storytelling sometimes can be. But it comes from a project called The Great Green Desert that I'm working on with my spouse and collaborator, Sarah Ross, who's not here today. So I'm not going to introduce it any more than that. I'm going to jump into the story, and hopefully some of the themes that have come about through our conversations will emerge through that story, or the multiple stories that are contained within the story I'll tell you. We're riding in a harvester in the fall of 2010, several miles east of the Illinois River, in a field of corn that looks exactly like most of the surrounding landscape. The drivers are two brothers, the Dudleys, who farm corn on 7,000 acres for the export market, mostly for Japan. It's what they call a specialty crop because it's not genetically modified. Most of their crop is shipped down the Mississippi River and leaves the US through ports outside of New Orleans. They tell us about the pressures of increasing land consolidation, skyrocketing rents, and the game that is commodity crop farming. In Illinois in 2016, the average return on corn per acre was about $710, while the expenses per acre averaged $810. Surrounding the Dudley's fields of specialty corn are thousands of acres of corn and soybeans, most of which are genetically modified. A good portion of that is purchased by large processors and traders like ADM, Bunge, and Cargill. So much of these crops are produced that it is often temporarily stored outside in large mounds rather than in silos. This is a mound of corn owned by Cargill outside of Beardstown, a small town on the Illinois River. One of the primary destinations for this corn, almost 90% of it in fact, is confined animal feedlots. About 1 mile away from this pile, Cargill operated a plant that slaughtered and packaged 18,000 hogs per day. It was bought by a Brazilian company named JBS a couple of years ago. In the economics of agribusiness, the dead flesh of hogs is simply an efficient way to sell a given amount of corn for more money. As early as the 1940s, the architectural theorist Siegfried Gideon recognized that the early 20th century boom in slaughterhouses throughout the US Midwest was tied to the surplus production of corn as a commodity with fluctuating value. What doesn't go to domestic feedlots in Texas, Oklahoma, and Nebraska will be shipped internationally to ports around the world. This machine that you see here is called a continuous barge unloader. And each of the buckets you see holds about 1,500 pounds of soy or corn. It moves about 4 million pounds per hour and operates almost around the clock all year long. This one is at a grain loading terminal on the Mississippi River in Louisiana, operated by a cooperative company named Cenex Harvest States, otherwise known as CHS. It's loading soybeans into a ship bound for China, now the largest importer of soy, importing 86 million metric tons in 2017, mostly from the US and Brazil. Where did the land for growing all of that soy and corn come from? A vast territory with Iowa and Illinois at its center is referred to by many as the Corn Belt, for the obvious reason that it's dominated by fields of corn and more recently soybeans. The terrain owes its flatness and geology to the Wisconsin glaciation period that ended around 10,000 years ago. Its celebrated nutrient-rich soil is largely the product of climate and ecosystems populated by grasses and forbs with incredibly deep root systems. When European settlers encountered this region in the 19th century, they often compared their first experiences in tallgrass prairie to that of being lost in an inland sea. Standing in the middle of tall grasses, it's not hard to see why. The settler experience was rooted in a combination of awe and frustration. It also revealed their indifference or even hostility to the life that existed there. The grasslands and marshes were considered an ocean they had to cross to get to the productive land of their colonial dreams. What prairie you can still see in the upper Midwest is almost certainly a restored prairie, land acquired and planted by the Nature Conservancy or other organizations like the Nachusa grasslands you see here. These areas function more like living dioramas than they do full-fledged ecosystems. By the beginning of the 20th century, less than 1/100% of 22 million acres of these grasslands remain in the state of Illinois, which is still unironically known as the Prairie State. It's June 2016, somewhere near the town of Sinop, in the center of the agricultural frontier state of Mato Grosso in western Brazil. We're riding in another combine harvesting corn and can almost imagine that we were still in central Illinois. Almost. This fazenda or plantation would dwarf most US corn and soy farms. And unlike the single corn and soy growing season in the US Midwest, this region of Brazil produces 3 to 4 annual crops of soy and corn. Most of the soybeans grown here are for export to China or for domestically consumed biodiesel. Just as the US Midwest had to be plowed and drained, the land in central Brazil had to be made suitable for monocropping. State-sponsored research in the US and Brazil led to the development of a tropical soybean variety in the middle of the 20th century, and the acidic soil there is made subservient with large amounts of fertilizers, pesticides, and lime. Sinop, an agricultural boomtown first colonized by European Brazilians in the 1970s, is at the western edge of the ecoregion known as the Cerrado. A neotropical savanna, the Cerrado covers 1/4 of Brazil and is South America's second largest biome after the Amazon forest. Scientists often refer to the Cerrado as an inverted forest because they estimate that 70% of the biomass of living vegetation there is underground, much like that of the extinct tallgrass prairies in the US Midwest. It is an extremely biodiverse region, is occupied by more than 80 indigenous groups, and feeds 8 of Brazil's 12 hydrographic regions, influencing atmospheric and groundwater throughout Central America, and we could argue the globe. Despite this, conservation scientists with the Chico Mendes Institute in Brasilia told us that the public doesn't have much appreciation for the Cerrado, who continue to see it as the empty space described by earlier settlers there. This is reflected in national policy. The Brazilian Forest Code mandates preservation of 80% of vegetation in the Amazon forest, but only 20 to 35% in the Cerrado grasslands. More than half of the total Cerrado biome has already been deforested, and it continues to lose about 6,000 square kilometers annually. This is a plant just outside of Chicago, operated by a company named Ingredion, and I'm not making the name up. Since 1904, when it was known as Corn Products International, at least it's a maybe more creative name now, it has invented many industrial uses for corn, including high fructose corn syrup. They are in the business of providing what they call ingredient solutions. They convert corn and other industrial produced crops into sensory experiences such as mouthfeel. Ingredion is just one site where you can see, hear, and smell the tensions between the complex system of industrial agriculture and the simplified ecosystems on which they thrive. One of the company's main slogans is its invitation to, and I'm quoting them here, enter the world of endless possibilities. As Brazilian geographer Gustavo Oliveira describes it, capitalist agribusiness has developed methods of producing an endless number of products from a single plant, and the type and amount of these products can shift depending on fluctuating profit margins. Such a system only makes sense, however, if you have a virtually endless amount of land devoted to that single plant. A world of endless opportunity can only be promised by taking social and ecological systems beyond their limits and the lifeways that depend on it. Sorry, I just skipped myself. As some of the early formulations of the field of political ecology understood land and the lifeways that depend on it, is degraded unless as much is returned as is taken. Clearly, the monocropping of corn and soy in the US and Brazil is designed to extract as much value from the land as it can while returning as little as possible. If the sea, feared then destroyed by my settler colonial ancestors, now resembles what we call a great green desert, the question I've been asking is how to imagine another sea, but from below. Thanks.